Pack your things and get out of my house. I don't care where you go, just go. Those were the last words my father said to me on a Tuesday night in February, when the temperature had dropped to 12 degrees and the wind was throwing sleet sideways against the kitchen window. I was 17 years old. I had a backpack, $32, and no coat because he slammed the door before I could grab it from the hook. I want to tell you this story the way it actually happened. Not the version I sanitized for years when people asked why I didn't have a relationship with my father. Not the version where I shrugged and said we just drifted apart. The real version. Because I spent a long time being ashamed of something that was never my fault, and I'm done with that now. My name is Ivy. I'm 31 years old, and the night my father threw me out in a February storm was the night everything in my life broke open and eventually, slowly, became something I actually wanted to live. My mother died when I was 12. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed in March, gone by September. She was 41 years old and she used to hum while she made coffee, and she always remembered which songs I liked and which ones made me cry. Her name was Judith, and losing her felt like losing the floor beneath my feet. Like every step after that was just falling, slowly, hoping something would catch you. My father's name is Gerald. He is not a cruel man in the way that people imagine cruelty. He never hit us, never screamed, never threw things. His cruelty was quieter than that. It was the way he looked through me. The way he turned toward my older brother Colin the moment my mother died, like Colin was the only one still worth seeing. Colin is 5 years older than me. When my mother died, he was 17, nearly an adult, already driving, already someone my father could talk to like a peer. I was 12 and I needed things, comfort, patience, someone to sit with me through the bad nights, and my father simply didn't have those things to give me. Or maybe he had them, and he chose to give them somewhere else. I told myself for years that he was grieving, that I needed to understand, that he was doing his best. I stopped telling myself that somewhere around the 3rd year after my mother died, when it became clear that his best was something he reserved entirely for Colin. When I was 14, my father sat me down and told me he was seeing someone. Her name was Diane. She was a dental hygienist from Dayton, Ohio, who wore her hair in a French twist and laughed too loudly at my father's jokes and looked at me like I was a problem she hadn't signed up to solve. They got married 8 months later. I was a bridesmaid at a wedding I wasn't consulted about, in a dusty rose dress I hated, standing next to Colin, who kept whispering that I needed to smile more. I did not smile more. Diane had a son from her first marriage. His name was Trevor. He was 22 when they got married, and he had that particular quality that some people have. The ability to seem charming and reasonable to everyone in the room except the one person he was quietly destroying. To my father, Trevor was funny and helpful and a good influence. To me, Trevor was the person who found every soft place in my life and pressed on it until it bruised. It started small, little things I couldn't prove. My homework moved, so I got detention for turning it in late. My phone charger that kept disappearing. The time I was supposed to be picked up from volleyball practice and nobody came because Trevor forgot to pass along the message. Each thing individually was easy to explain away. Together they added up to something that felt like being slowly erased. I tried to tell my father. Twice. The first time he said, "Trevor's a grown adult, Ivy. He has no reason to do that." The second time he said, "You know, your mother used to say you had a tendency to over-dramatize things." He had never once said that to me before. And my mother had never said it either, but I was 15, and he was my father, and I still believed that adults knew things I didn't. I stopped believing that on a Tuesday in February when I was 17. My mother had a life insurance policy. I didn't know about it until I was 16 when her sister, my Aunt Lorraine, who lived in Asheville and had driven 12 hours to come to the funeral and cried harder than anyone except me, sent me a birthday card with a handwritten note inside. Honey, your mother left something for you. When you're ready, call me. I called her from the school parking lot the next day. She told me that my mother had taken out a policy years before she got sick, that she'd named me as the sole beneficiary, that the amount after my father had already accessed and contested parts of it was just over $60,000 held in a custodial account that I couldn't touch until I turned 18. $60,000. That was my mother's way of saying I knew. I knew there might come a time when you'd need a way out. When I told my father I knew about the account, something shifted in his face. Not guilt exactly. More like the face of someone who has been running a calculation for a long time and has just realized one of the variables changed. He didn't say anything that night, neither did Diane. But Trevor, who happened to be visiting that weekend, said at dinner, "You know those accounts have a lot of fees. By the time you get it, it'll be worth way less." He said it so casually, like he was just making conversation. I looked at him across the table and I understood for the first time exactly what kind of person he was. The next few months got worse quickly. Trevor started staying at the house more. He and my father started having long conversations I wasn't part of. Twice I came downstairs late and the conversation stopped when I walked in. Diane started making comments about how I'd have money soon and maybe I should start thinking about getting my own place. I was 17. I was a junior in high school. I had nowhere to go. Then in January, $1,000 went missing from my father's checking account. I know this because my father told me. He sat me down in the kitchen with the kind of deliberate calm that is worse than yelling, and he said, "I need you to tell me what you did with it." I didn't know what he was talking about. I said so. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a bank transfer record. My name, my account number. $1,000 transferred from his account to mine at 11:14 on a Thursday night. I had been at my best friend Cassandra's house that Thursday night. I had been there from 6 in the evening until the next morning because we were studying for an AP chemistry exam. Cassandra's mother had made us tacos. I had slept on their pull-out couch and woken up with a spring poking my shoulder. I said all of this. I said I didn't do it, that I wasn't home, that someone else must have transferred it. My father said, "Who else would have access to your account number?" And the true answer was, anyone who'd been in my room, gone through my files, found the paperwork my Aunt Irene had sent me. Anyone who had been staying in this house for the past several months and had a very clear reason to want me gone before I turned 18 and got $60,000 that they had apparently decided should be theirs. But I was 17 and I had no proof, and my father had already decided. He said, "I've spoken with Diane. We both think it's best if you find somewhere else to stay while we figure this out." I said, "Dad, it's February. It's 12 degrees outside." He said, "Pack your things and get out of my house. I don't care where you go. Just go." I stood on the front porch for about 30 seconds after the door closed. The sleet was coming sideways. I had on a hoodie and jeans and canvas sneakers. I had my backpack with my laptop, my charger, a change of clothes I'd grabbed without thinking. I had $32 in my wallet, 2 tens, a 5, a bunch of ones, because I'd been meaning to deposit it. I started walking. I don't know how long I walked. I wasn't thinking clearly. I remember the specific feeling of the cold getting inside my hoodie, through the fabric, settling against my skin like something permanent. I remember my fingers going numb and then going past numb into something worse. I remember thinking about Cassandra and then remembering that her family had left that afternoon for a long weekend in Savannah. I remember thinking about other people I could call and then realizing my phone was at 4% battery and my charger was in my bag, but there was nowhere to plug it in. I sat down on the steps of a closed pharmacy on Jefferson Street. I don't know why I stopped there specifically. I think my legs just decided they were done. A car slowed down, a white Subaru wagon. The window came down and a woman leaned across from the driver's seat, 50s, reading glasses pushed up on her head, a YMCA sticker on the back window. She said, "Honey, it is 17 degrees out here. Do you need help?" Her name was Barbara. She was a middle school librarian who had been driving home from a late parent teacher conference. She brought me to her house, gave me dry clothes and a cup of soup, and sat across from me at her kitchen table while I told her everything. She didn't say much while I talked. When I finished, she said, "Okay, let's figure out who we need to call." Barbara called the non-emergency police line. She called the Department of Children and Family Services. She called her own daughter, who was a paralegal, and asked her a lot of questions I didn't fully understand about custodial accounts and emancipation. She let me sleep in her guest room, and in the morning, she drove me to school herself and walked me inside and asked to speak to my school counselor. My school counselor's name was Mr. Hensley. He was a quiet man who wore the same 3 sweaters in rotation and kept a bowl of Werther's on his desk and had, I think, seen enough hard things in his career that he didn't panic when another hard thing walked through his door. He listened, he took notes, he made phone calls of his own. What happened next took weeks, and it was not simple, and it was not clean. A child protective services caseworker interviewed me, then interviewed my father, then interviewed Diane. She was professional and careful, and I could tell she was trying to find the least disruptive resolution, which in these situations usually means keeping the family together in whatever configuration already exists. My father told her I had stolen the money, that I had a history of dishonesty, that I had been difficult since my mother died. Diane confirmed all of it. But Cassandra's mother confirmed where I'd been that Thursday night. She confirmed it in writing, with time-stamped photos from her security system that showed my arrival at 6:08 p.m. and my departure the next morning at 7:43 a.m. She had not been asked for this. She offered it because Cassandra had called her from the beach in Savannah and told her what happened, and she drove home 2 days early. I want to say that right. Cassandra's mother, her name is Rhonda, and she teaches kindergarten and makes the best tres leches cake I have ever eaten in my life. Came home early from a family vacation because my friend called her and said I needed help. I have thought about that a lot in the years since, the way people who don't have to show up sometimes show up harder than anyone else. The bank investigated the transfer. It took them longer than I wanted, and the process was frustrating in the particular way that institutional processes are frustrating when you're 17 and don't have a lawyer and everything feels urgent. But the investigation eventually showed that the transfer had been initiated from an IP address associated with Trevor's laptop, not mine. His. Trevor denied it. He said he'd been at his apartment in Columbus. His apartment Wi-Fi records told a different story. The case was referred to the county prosecutor's office. Trevor was charged with identity fraud and theft. He eventually pleaded down to misdemeanor fraud and paid a fine and did community service, which I will admit is not the crushing verdict some part of me wanted, but it was something. It was documented. It was real. My father called me when the charges were filed. He said, "I owe you an apology." I said, "You threw me out into 12-degree weather in February." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know." I didn't have anything else to say after that, so I said goodbye and hung up. I want to tell you about my Aunt Lorraine. She drove from Asheville to Columbus the same week Barbara called DCFS. She showed up at Mr. Hensley's office with a container of homemade oatmeal cookies and a folder of documents and a look on her face that I can only describe as someone who has been waiting to be useful and has finally been given permission. She had already spoken with a family law attorney about my options. She had already looked into the custodial account and confirmed that it was intact and could not be accessed by anyone except me upon my 18th birthday, which was 11 months away. She had already talked to her landlord about whether the garage apartment on her property was available and confirmed that it was. She sat across from me in Mr. Hensley's office and she said, "Your mother asked me to look out for you if something happened. I should have done it sooner. I'm sorry I didn't. I'm here now." If you want to come live with me while you finish high school, I will drive back to Asheville and come back with a truck by the weekend. I didn't cry in front of her. I waited until I was in the bathroom with the door locked and the water running. Then I said yes. The year I spent in Asheville was the first year of my life after my mother died. That felt like solid ground. Aunt Lorraine's house sits on a half-acre lot with a creek behind it that freezes in December and fills up with fireflies in June. The garage apartment has two windows that look out into the woods and a small kitchen and a bathroom with hexagonal tile that she picked out herself in 1987 and has never once thought about changing. I had my own space. I had quiet. I had someone who cooked dinner most nights and knocked on my door sometimes just to see if I wanted to watch television. I finished my senior year at a high school 20 minutes away. I made friends, not deep ones. It was 1 year and I was still carrying a lot, but real ones, people who knew some of what I'd been through and didn't make it weird. I applied to colleges. I got into 3. The month I turned 18, I sat in a bank in Asheville with Aunt Lorraine beside me and a banker across the desk, and I watched the custodial account transferred into a regular account with my name on it. $62,000 including interest. My mother had opened that policy when I was 4 years old. She had been paying into it for 8 years before she died. I held it together until we got to the car, and then I didn't hold it together anymore. She planned for you, my aunt said. Not as comfort exactly, but as fact. She saw who you were going to be and she planned for you. I went to Ohio State. I majored in social work because of what Mr. Hensley did for me, because of what Rhonda did, because of what Barbara the librarian did, because somewhere in that terrible February I learned that the most important thing a person can do is notice when someone needs help and then actually do something about it. I graduated in 4 years. I used the rest of my mother's money for my last 2 years of school and for a deposit on an apartment in Columbus, and that felt right, using what she left me to build exactly what she would have wanted for me. I don't have a relationship with my father. I want to be straightforward about that. Because I know these stories are sometimes expected to end with forgiveness and reconciliation and a tearful conversation where everyone gets what they need. That's not what happened here. My father called me twice in the years after I left. Once when Trevor's charges were finalized, once when he and Diane separated. A few years later, I don't know the details and I didn't ask. He said he'd made mistakes. He said he hoped I was doing well. He said he thought about my mother a lot. I believe him about that last part. I believe he thinks about her. I believe he loved her and that losing her broke something in him that he never fixed and that he made terrible choices in the brokenness, choices that cost me things I can't get back. I understand all of that. Understanding it doesn't mean I want him at my dinner table. I have Aunt Lorraine. I have Cassandra, who was my maid of honor when I got married 4 years ago. I have Rhonda, who sent an enormous tres leches cake to my wedding. I have a husband named Wade who knows the whole story and has never once suggested I should reach out or get closure or any of the other things people say when they're uncomfortable with other people's reasonable decisions about their own families. I have, most days, a life that feels like something my mother would be proud of. What I think about now, at 31, looking back at the 17-year-old standing on that porch in February with $32 and nowhere to go, what I think is that she survived something she shouldn't have had to survive. And she survived it because strangers stepped up when family stepped back. Barbara, who saw a kid sitting on the steps of a pharmacy in the cold and stopped her car. Rhonda, who came home from vacation. Mr. Hensley, who had seen enough hard things that he knew what to do with one more. Aunt Lorraine, who showed up with oatmeal cookies and a folder of documents and a garage apartment with 2 windows looking out into the woods. Nobody who had a legal obligation to protect me actually protected me, and everybody who showed up didn't have to. That's the thing I tried to carry with me now, in the work I do, in the way I move through the world. You don't have to be someone's family to be the person who matters. You just have to stop the car. My mother knew that. She knew it when she opened that insurance policy with a 4-year-old's name on it, betting on a future she wasn't sure she'd be alive to see. I don't know what she thought my life would look like, but I think she'd be glad I found people worth keeping, even if they weren't the ones she expected. That's enough. That's more than enough. I still think about that pharmacy on Jefferson Street sometimes. The closed gate, the sleet coming sideways, the way my legs just stopped working and I sat down without deciding to. At 17, I didn't have language for what was happening to me. I just knew I was cold and I had nowhere to go, and the person who was supposed to protect me had just closed a door in my face. What Trevor did wasn't complicated. When you strip it down, he saw something that wasn't his, and he wanted it, and he was willing to destroy a 17-year-old to get it. That's not a mystery. That's just what happens when someone has no real sense of right and wrong. Not the performative kind, not the kind that shows up when people are watching, but the kind that holds when no one is looking. Trevor didn't have that. My father, in that moment, didn't use his either. He had evidence that pointed at me and a stepson he wanted to believe, and he chose the easier story. Those choices had consequences, they always do. Not because the universe is keeping score in some cosmic ledger, but because the people around us are watching, and the truth has a way of becoming visible eventually, whether we help it along or not. What I had, what I didn't fully understand, I had until much later, was the ability to think clearly even when I was terrified. Sitting in Barbara's kitchen that night, I didn't fall apart. I told the story in order. I remembered the dates, the times, the details. I knew that Cassandra's mother had a security system. I knew that IP addresses are traceable. I wasn't calm because I was brave. I was functional because my mother had raised me to pay attention, to trust what I knew, to not let someone else's version of events replace my own. That clarity, holding on to what was actually true when everything around me was trying to rewrite it, that's what made the difference. Not luck, not fate, that. And then there's the part that took me the longest to understand. Survival isn't a solo act. I didn't make it through that winter because I was strong enough to do it alone. I made it through because Barbara stopped her car, because Rhonda came home early, because Mr. Tobai Hensley had a bowl of Verders on his desk and the patience to hear one more heart story. Every single one of those people chose, in a small or large way, to do something they weren't required to do. That kind of choosing is a muscle. You build it by using it. I try to use it now in my own work, with the kids who sit across from me the way I once sat across from Mr. Hensley, tired and scared and not yet sure that anyone is coming. My mother knew something I had to learn the hard way. She knew that love without follow-through is just a feeling, and feelings don't pay rent or keep a kid warm in February. So she did something practical. She opened an account. She paid into it for 8 years. She made a plan for a future she wasn't going to be part of. That is what it looks like to love someone with your whole self, not just with your heart, but with your judgment, your foresight, your willingness to act, even when acting is inconvenient. I think about the version of me who might have accepted my father's story, who might have believed I was the problem. She was right there. That version, sitting on those pharmacy steps, already halfway convinced that maybe she had done something wrong and just couldn't remember it. What pulled her back was knowing her own life well enough to defend it. I was at Cassandra's. I knew I was. I held on to that like it was a rope in a current, and I didn't let go. That's the only thing I know how to pass forward. Know your own story, don't hand it to someone else to rewrite, and when you see someone sitting in the cold with nowhere to go, stop the car.